And it drives creativity in a recession because you can't any longer give thought to just paying a really good production company or creative company to do it all for you. It's about brainstorming, it's about getting your hands dirty, and it's about going what if, which is something which can be extremely exciting and challenging. So make sure that there are deals to be done, and make sure that you are talking to all of your suppliers in a recession. Honestly, you can push and push, and if you can package up a deal and you can go to a printer and say, you can have my next business for the whole of the next 12 months or 3 years, they'll do a deal that you never thought they would do. But it takes courage to pick up the phone and say, will you do this? I mentioned in the agenda that we'd look at some hidden consequences of what happens when you haven't got the money. And going back to our love of equations, those of us in the events business, this one is one of my favorites, where B is budget and E is effort. And I can assure you that if B gets any worse, E multiplies even more. So the result of that is that you and your teams who are working, whether you're in a production company or you're the client, your teams are going to get exhausted because you're working them that much harder. You can't take it for granted. If you're going to be creative, and in my team we've decided to fill some Perspex vases full of lemons and limes and oranges instead of finding somebody else to do table centres, we thought we'd do that. But it meant that the team was up at 4 o'clock in the morning going to New Covent Garden. That team was exhausted. The table centres looked lovely, but they were tired. If you push and push and push at your suppliers, and also with your teams, you might suffer from strained relationships, and you need to think about that. Everybody's tired, everybody's doing this for fewer rewards, and the relationships that get strained can be difficult to repair. So go easy on yourselves and try and go easy on suppliers. Everybody's doing their best. When you do things yourself, or when you do things cheaper, your risks increase. And that, if you couple that with the fact that some of you and some of us have lost colleagues in our business due to the recession, there are fewer people around to do the work. And I don't know why we do it. We must love what we do. But certainly this year, fewer rewards. You know, when I came into the business, it was all about swanning around in Park Lane and having a suite at the Grosvenor House once or twice. It doesn't happen anymore. Nobody can afford, there are pay freezes, all sorts of things. So we must be doing this for the love of what we do because it's tricky. And of course, there's more to go wrong. The more we do ourselves, the more risk we take, and the more that can go wrong. So when people say, look, let's run an awards on a recession, it isn't just how are we going to make sure that the food is right. It's how do we motivate our teams, how do we keep our relationships with our suppliers right, and how do we keep going even when there are fewer rewards. Doing it yourself is tricky. Wow factor is what it's all about in an awards ceremony. You might want to differentiate yourselves, as we've tried to do and I've tried to do, with making judging credible, but you need to have an awards ceremony, whether you've got £1 million budget or not. Did anyone ever have £1 million budget? That delivers real wow factor. And one of the most important ways of doing this, I can't stress this enough, and I hope it is teaching you to suck eggs, but don't forget, it's about your host. No matter how long you take doing a tasting in a very lovely, fancy 5-star hotel, and I've sat there when we've debated the flavour of the peppermint creams to be served after dinner, it's actually how good was your host that will be remembered. So if you're used to spending 10% of your budget on a host, and that budget has been extremely squeezed and reduced, that 10% is still important. You have to invest. You know what I mean. Excuse my language, but if you've got a crappy host, you've got a crappy event. Any complaints to the back of the room, please. Being creative. I talked about brainstorming. You need to differentiate yourself as much as possible. You need to put yourself out there and think with your teams, how can we do this differently? How can we make the set look different? How can we make people walk through a tunnel? What can we make ourselves that will make us look different? Think the unthinkable, and there's a little bit more about that later on. Here are some top tips, which I hope you'll find useful. Adding value at low cost. Again, this is useful as a client and an organizer, but you could advise if you're a supplier. We've done something like tiered seating. So a bit like when you go to the theatre, we've said if you as a sponsor or as a paying guest would like to sit nearer the front of an award ceremony, it'll cost you a 10% premium. Tiered seating, whether it be platinum, gold and silver, or however you want to choose it, it costs you nothing to put somebody in a table at the front as opposed to in the middle or the back, but you can start generating more revenue that way. If you can, try and use production agencies who own their own equipment. What's happening when you use a production agency and they go outside to their own suppliers is you're often paying twice. If you can find a supplier that owns its own equipment, has equipment sitting in a warehouse, they'll be much more likely to do you a deal and much more likely to give you more value for your money. So if you can do that, do. Charity partners, if you've got no way of paying for any celebrity to come onto your stage, and you really haven't got the wow factor, it's a perfectly nice workable event, but you haven't got that X factor, a charity partner can give you just that. So we've worked with the Stephanie Moore, with her Bobby Moore Fund, and she shows an incredible video, which is very moving. She herself stands up, and for the right audience, she'll bring on a footballer from the World Cup or talking about football, and the whole audience goes mad. You're generating revenue for a worthy cause, and you've got your wow factor for no cost to you. So find a good charity partner. And that one's perfect for some male-orientated, perhaps, events. But we've worked with Duke of Edinburgh Awards. We've worked with other, like Save the Children, who can bring you incredible prizes. And so the wow factor in a night is a week on Necker Island, which has cost you nothing, but everybody's talked about it after the event. Always, if you can, try and get a venue with no background noise, just like this one. Differentiate yourself in any way you can. So I talked about credibility. But we've also thought about doing events which are carbon neutral. Put yourself out there as an event that is the first truly green event, for example. Make something different about yourself that people will go, okay, I can see that that's different, I'll go and try that one. Partner with other people. If you find an amazing production company who just hasn't got the right way with graphics, but you know a really good graphics company who wouldn't have a clue how to do production, introduce them to each other. Now is the time to matchmake. You can make fantastic partnerships. People who didn't know each other before, we've put together, are now making amazing teams because we put them together and they give us exactly what they want. Back-to-back events. If you're brave, pick up the phone, find out who's in the Hilton Park Lane the day before you, ring them and say, would you mind if we used the same production company and we shared a set? You know, in a time when we all had lots of money, we didn't talk to anybody, everybody was a competitor and everybody was dreadful and we wanted to kill them all. Now is the time to make friends across industry and just across the board, go and find out who's doing what and see if you can work together. And challenge the status quo. In a recession, some things are very difficult. We've had an awards in one venue for about 32 years. You have to sometimes think the unthinkable and go, could we move? And most of you will go, oh, we couldn't possibly move. We've been here for 32 years. Yes, you can. Yes, you can move. But we've done a sit-down dinner for 140 years for this particular client. Well, why not do a stand-up canapé reception? I hope this isn't too obvious for you, but sometimes we sit at our desks or in our offices and it's just unthinkable to change and challenge the status quo. You can do it, and actually your customers, your sponsors, and you will feel refreshed by the change. Now, what about measuring success? So, there's no money in the kitty, you're not going to make any money at the end of this either, and this is particularly for those of you working in a commercial environment. How can you measure whether an event's going well or not when there's no budget?